Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Kretka, Education Advisor to Namely, and I'm thrilled to have you here for our first evening event of U.S. Media Literacy Week, Banned Books and Events from Censorship to Access with Drag Story Hour. Before we begin, I wanted to share a little more about what you can expect over the coming days. This year, we're celebrating 10 years of U.S. Media Literacy Week, which has sought to call attention to media literacy education by bringing together hundreds of partners for events and activities around the country. In the last 10 years, the landscape of media literacy education has changed drastically, and we anticipate this year to highlight both how far we've come and what work will need to be done in the next 10 years. I want to also thank our sponsors, Meta, Trend Micro, Thomas Reuters, Google Be Internet Awesome, Roblox, Microsoft, and TikTok for making Media Literacy Week possible. Each day this week, we'll have programming that aligns to the 5 pillars of media literacy: access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. It feels particularly fitting that we are rounding out today's theme, access, with this conversation on how libraries and community programming can stand as a bastion to access and free thought. We are grateful to Drag Story Hour for their help in putting this event together and grateful to all participants for being here. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Hamill to the stage to introduce this panel and fellow panelists.
Hi, thank you so much, Dan. And thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Namely, for having us. Congratulations on 10 years. It has also been 10 years of Drag Story Hour next year, believe it or not. So I love that we're all 10 years old. Uh, let me share my presentation with y'all. Here we go. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you for having us again. Welcome to Banned Books and Events from Censorship to Access with the Drag Story Hour and some very special panelists today. I'm Jonathan Hamill, he, him. I'm with Drag Story Hour. I've been with the organization for about 8 or 9 years now. I'm also a drag artist. Ona Louise, who did not come today, but you get me instead. I'm based in New York State and really excited to introduce you to our panelists. We have 3 other amazing people with us that we're gonna go around and meet them before we get started. So I'd love to start with our storyteller for the afternoon, Stormy Day. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stormy Day. I use she, they pronouns because when the wig is on, baby, the gig is on, and I'm happy to be here. I've been an avid reader since childhood, and I'm happy to be a national reader for the Story Hour. I am also an NB Black queer from the South, and I read almost every day, it seems like, and I'm happy to be reading to y'all today. How are y'all doing? I think I can see it in the chat. Y'all are so lovely. Well, should we get started? Would y'all like to read a story right now? Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to hold off. This one is near and dear to me. Everyone knows that this season is Halloween season. Yes, it's all month long. So, this is a book about a wonderful queer child, and it's called A Costume for Charlie. It's by C.K. Malone, and it is illustrated by Alejandra Bajaras. Each Halloween, Charlie couldn't decide whether to be fabulous or frightening. And this year was harder than ever. Ooh, what a decision. I wake up and feel the exact same way. Am I going to be frightening or fabulous today? Charlie rummaged through the mismatch in the old costumes box for something that showed they were both a boy and a girl. Because, everybody needs a little bit of both. One by one, Charlie tried on costumes. The astronaut costume covered them completely. The clown costume wasn't very funny. And hiding behind monstrous masks wasn't the point at all, because no one can see your face value. The costumes puddled at Charlie's feet. All were great, but not quite right. Charlie dug deep, deep, deep into the box. Ooh, what do y'all think Charlie's gonna find in the box? You know, an old Twix bar maybe they left in there. We'll find out. The Red Riding Hood costume? Red fascinated in the fairy tale, but everyone called her a girl. Charlie wriggled into the outfit. The fabric fluttered through the air, yet their boy half felt eaten by the wolf. Ooh, what beautiful petticoat Charlie has, though. All the better to be seen in. Maybe fairy tale heroines weren't for them. Charlie grabbed the Dracula costume, though in the story, Dracula was a blood curdling boy. Blah. Off came Red's costume and a vengeful vampire appeared. Still, Charlie fretted and frowned. The glistening teeth terrified and Fangy delight, but took a bite out of their girl half. Oh, you know, I love anyone who has a spare waistcoat. I know, Jonathan, you probably have a spare waistcoat just lying around. Charlie sniffled as they scooped up the clumps of costumes. These were all wrong, too. Why can't there be a costume just for me? Right? Have you ever felt that way on Halloween and you're like, I don't want to be non-trademarkable Trolls doll. You want to be something specific, like maybe Peregrine Took or Bilbo Baggins. Then, after a minute or two, an idea took root and grew and grew and grew until they knew what to do. Ooh, if you have an idea in the chat, go ahead. Maybe you think you know what's going to happen. Maybe you were here last year. Maybe you're here this year and it speaks to you. Charlie tore the Dracula costume apart, rip, 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 and cut up Red's cloth. Ooh, we getting cooking now. What would Tim Gunn say, y'all? Better make it work. Don't bore Nina. Charlie designed, fashioned, and crafted until at last they created one from two. No one will have a costume like this, they exclaimed and danced around the room. It's two things when you dance, you know it's good: food and your look. Charlie tussled the ruffled collar and bared their fangs. They balanced the basket on their arm. Trick or treating, presenting as both a boy and a girl, would be the best feeling in the world. And that was a costume for Charlie. Did y'all enjoy? Oh, y'all are so lovely. Thank you so much for allowing me to read to y'all. I love reading and I love talking about children's literacy. So I'm sure we have plenty of more to say.
Yes, plenty more to say once I figure out my microphone situation. Um, Great. Thank you so much, Stormy. I love a little festive autumnal Halloween story. We're gonna keep it going with our next presenter. I would love to introduce Fritzy. Please introduce yourself.
That is a really hard act to follow, but I'm going to do my best. I'm Fritzi Bodenheimer. I'm the press officer for Brooklyn Public Library, which means I handle all the press and media for our 62 branches. We're the sixth largest library system in the nation, and we are a leader in the fight against censorship. And I also have some background as a news producer, a news announcer, and a news writer, so hopefully that will be helpful today, and I'm just really glad to be here.
Amazing. And last but not least, Dr. Howell, please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. I am Dr. Gary Howell. I'm a clinical psychologist, and my practice is in Tampa, Florida, where I primarily work with LGBT patients. And I also teach in a doctoral program where I do a lot of the education around LGBT competency. And yeah, I work a lot with youth, especially trans youth and their families. So this is a topic that's near and dear to me, of especially living in the state of Florida, where we've been certainly under siege the past year or so. So anything I can do to help spread this information, I'm happy to do.
Amazing. So we are in good company with this panel. We're going to give it to you, right? So I'm assuming we're at, the media literacy conference. Most, if not everyone, knows about Drag Story Hour. What you may not know is that we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And like I mentioned earlier, we've been around for about almost 10 years, coming up on 2025. So like, what do we do? It's exactly like it sounds. It's drag storytellers and artists that use that traditional art form of drag, and we utilize the traditional structure of story times that libraries have been using since the 1900s, which is widely recognized as an effective literacy experience for kids and their families. And that's what we do. We meet your bread and butter story time with the art of drag, and that's where the magic happens. So what is our mission? We celebrate reading through the glamorous art of drag, and Drag Story Hour creates diverse, accessible, and culturally inclusive family programming where we want kids to express their authentic selves and be bright lights of changing their communities. And that is what we do at Story Hour. And we want a world where no stories are banned or censored. And we want kids to learn from LGBTQ plus stories and experiences for them to be able to love themselves and just celebrate the fabulous diversity that the world we live in, where they can grow up and see differences and accept those differences and love that about the universe. So this is just a timeline of our org and kind of where we started. We are not owning the fact that queer people have dressed up in some type of attire or costume. I'm sure queer storytelling to young humans has been happening since the dawn of time, but our organization first was organized in 2015 in the San Francisco Public Library System with Persia and Radar Productions. And we moved forward to a great timeline where we even changed our name from Drag Queen Story Hour to be more inclusive to Drag Story Hour. So here we are almost 10 years later, and our first documentation of this being kind of organized modern day is the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is an amazing drag community that you should look up, that they were first reading in San Francisco, which makes a lot of sense. It just is very them. Yeah, most people know us in libraries, but we are in schools as well. We do middle school book clubs. We go to high schools and do GSA and drama club visits. Back in my day, it was called the Gay Alliance. Now I think it's the Gender Sexuality Alliance or Association. We do bilingual or multilingual story hours. We have our Indigenous drag story hours that is comprised of trans women who are Indigenous who do drag. Definitely check that out, see an Indigenous drag story hour. We work with neurodiverse communities. We work with medically fragile communities as well. We love our seniors. We do drag bingos. We do drag sing-alongs. We do DEI roundtables. And we speak at conferences. There's nothing that Stormy can't do. And she's done a lot of those. And we're just not in the US. We are global. We are all over the world. We have some amazing chapter network system in Tokyo, in Sweden, in Berlin, in Canada, in Spain, in Perth, Australia. Mexico has about 13 different city-state chapters alone. And it's really amazing. And they're going to be doing a Day of the Dead story hour with us. So please look out for that on YouTube. Yeah, that was my little pitch of Story Hour as an org. We like to do these group agreements whenever we have a board meeting or an internal story hour. So I thought it'd be appropriate while we're on a panel for all of our attendees to join in on some fun kind of agreements. So we want to co-create a brave space. There are no safe spaces inherently in the world, but together we can make a brave space where we can have the courage to stand up and talk about what we want to talk about. Assuming best intentions, if something maybe come out wrong the first time, that we're assuming everyone has the best intentions with each other. And if you have a reaction to something, if you have a visceral reaction to a comment, maybe stop and wonder why you feel that way about something and really think about turning that reaction to wonder and asking yourself, why do I think this way about this thing? And also accepting multiplicities. Multiple things can be true at the same time. The drag story hour is not a monolith to any freedom of speech or anything of that. And lots of things can be real at the same time. And body awareness, if you need to take a break, turn your camera off or turn your camera on. I know we can't see you in a webinar format, but please join in the chat. And we love participation. And please interrupt us with questions in the chat. If you want to add your 2 cents or have some more things to bring to the table, please do. We love an exchange. Great. So the world's really crazy right now. There's a lot of things going on in the Western world in the United States. Drag Story Hour, as amazing and magical as it is, has had a lot of pushback and has a lot of opposition against our organization. And it's kind of good to kind of call out what those harms are and what the opposition looks like before we kind of get into a questionnaire. So there's lots of different places of where this harm is coming from. Our big things are the hate groups that you might have heard of. I've listed those that you can kind of research. You probably heard of those, maybe your own community. And unfortunately, obviously, there's a lot of right-wing extremist news outlets that are really after spreading misinformation and disinformation about queer people in general. Obviously, the abundance of anti-drag and anti-LGBT legislations, transphobic and homophobic institutions, right there. And kind of a not so talked about harm is rogue supporters who may really love what we do, but come from a different place of not de-escalation and maybe more confrontational, which is great. And you should do what you need to do to get your point across. But with Drag Story Hour, we have a very de-escalatory, keeping kids and families safe kind of mindset. And some rogue people can kind of throw that out of our orbit of peace, I guess, for lack of a better term. Anyway, we have lots to talk about. These questions are going to be directed to certain people on the panel, but if anybody on the panel can answer these or wants to contribute, please do. But this first question is going to be, I feel like it's like Hollywood Squares or something. This first question is for Fritzy. So generally, libraries have been historically defenders of intellectual freedom. How are you balancing maintaining that tradition while facing pressures from groups pushing the banning of events like Drag Story Hour?
This is actually a great question, and I'm happy to say that in Brooklyn Public Library, our main point of balance is to go forward. We don't want to cancel any events because of pressure from the haters, I guess is a good way to say it. But having said that, Brooklyn Public Library is a big library system. We're in a place where most people are not haters and who believe in diversity. Obviously, Brooklyn is a very diverse place and we're proud of it. So I realize that I'm coming from that sort of privilege. I'm not working for a library in a small town. No offense, Dr. Howell, but like in Florida or in Texas. And I have that privilege. But I think it's different than it was even 5 years ago, right? So now we say we're going to go forward, we're going to hold that event, but we put a lot more precautions in place, whereas before we didn't have any. We just had the event and everyone was happy and glittery and everything was great. But now when we have an event with our local chapter of Drag Story Hour, we talk to public safety. We know how the performer is coming in and out of the door. We may have something in a different room than we would have had it before. So in our case, again, because we have this privilege of being in Brooklyn and being a big library system, our plan is to go forward. If we cancel an event because of, Moms for Liberty or the haters, that just, I feel like, gives them the power. But I do recognize that, someone in a small town may have to make some adjustments that we don't have to make here.
And Brooklyn Public Library was the first to adopt Drag Story Hour. It was the very first library system in New York. Before Manhattan, New York Public Library, the Brooklyn Public Library was the champions of Drag Story Hour in New York. So can't stop, won't stop with that.
Exactly.
So this question is directed to Dr. Howell. There's a lot of claims that events like Drag Story Hour are harmful. From a psychology perspective, how does exposure to Drag Story Hours impact a kid's social and emotional development?
Sure, thank you. Well, first and foremost, I think, children who have the ability to interact with different social norms like leads to a better sense of internal development and like things like empathy, emotional intelligence, and even social flexibility, having that space available. And it also allows these kids to really engage in perspective taking so they can which is something that's important to cognitive skills and cognitive skill building, especially among youth. And that helps them understand other people and how understand how other people may have different thoughts or feelings and experiences from their own. And we know that Drag Story Hour has really been a powerful tool that's nurtured creative minds among children. One way is breaking down stereotypes, really creating a space that's equitable, that's inclusive, and when we're talking about kids and teens, it also allows them to potentially have these kind of conversations with their parents and share those experiences so that they can see themselves sometimes reflected in those experiences. That may also be one place that they feel safe to be authentic because they see someone who is different. And we really start to recognize some of that difference at a very early age.
Amazing. Yeah, we talk a lot about doors and windows and sliding glass doors with Drag Story Hour, and I do think that mirroring is a big part of
Mhm.
what we do. Um, Great segue into this question directed to Stormy. Um, yes. Um, I don't know if you know this, Stormy, but drag is an art form that is often misunderstood. I don't know if you know that or not, but um, what role do you see drag story hours playing in promoting inclusivity and acceptance for the future? And with that, why do you think it's so controversial?
I think it is, first, I say, amazing panel and also wonderful question. I think promoting inclusivity and going outside of yourself is always controversial in this country because when we start to break down barriers, we start to communicate, and we start to communicate, we start to work against the forces that would have our undoing. People don't want drag story hours to happen because we do promote this idea of inclusivity outside of drag, outside of queerness. Drag story hours, as you say, happen in places for people of a certain generation. We are going into classrooms, we're going into living centers and communities, and we're talking about diverse experiences, stories of children. We didn't have some of the first children stories for Black children until the 60s. As a drag story hour reader, I'm reading stories about children of all different cultures, and oftentimes the families who come to these, not always a part of the cultures I read. So we're learning together about different people from a drag queen, from a queer person, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about having different abilities or having different body types. There's so many things that we present to children that this is oftentimes the first place that they're going to see it, because we know media capitalism as it is does not make constructive, diverse life accessible to our children, to anyone. So at Drag Story Hour, we're doing the work of bringing people together across topics.
Amazing. Yeah, and speaking of representation in books, since the birth of Drag Story Hour, we've had many drag artists write and publish their own works. We've had Little Miss Hot Mess that's now on her third children's book. We have Banda Dulce that's written a book. We have Lady Shook, who's one of our founders of the Indigenous Drag Story Hour. Her book just came out as well. So we're also creating drag authors who are reading about themselves and other drag artists to kids, which is even more like layered, which I love. Um, so this is a study that actually was done. This is by, I want to say, oh, who is this by? I'm so sorry. I believe this is by ACLU. In 2022, they tracked over 1,200 hate and anti-government groups across the country. This is just kind of giving you a quick snapshot of what we're against. You know, Fritzy's talking about being in Brooklyn and how it's been sort of like a safe haven, but someone like, you know, the work that Stormy is doing in North Carolina and Gary in Florida, this is kind of the reality of what's happening in different parts of the country, which is pretty terrifying. Cool. That's actually Southern Poverty Law Center, excuse me, who did this study. Great. This is geared towards Fritzy, but have you noticed any shifts in library policies towards other types of community events that may lead to more bans in the future? And with that, like, what's the tipping point that could shift everything?
I mean, yeah, there are a lot of it, look, the world we live in right now, as you mentioned earlier, is a really, at least in our country, but probably in some others, it's just a really contentious place. And I think this culture that we're living in has caused people to feel like they have to take a side, you're with us or against us. And not just on this issue, but on others, we have to um, take a look at safety. It's always safety, right? Because in the library, we don't censor. We have books on our shelves that we don't like, and probably no one in this room would agree with, but they are on our shelves and they are intended to be a point of conversation, or, just don't take it off the shelf if it doesn't meet your needs or your family needs. But we especially Brooklyn Public Library, like we've been shouting from the rooftops for the last 2.5 years with our Books Unbanned program that we believe in intellectual freedom. And that is a basic democratic American value. That is what our Constitution says, that we are able to access information from all points of view. That is our right and our the underlying mission of a public library and of a democracy. So yes, are we more careful? Do we like, I'm more friendly now with our public safety team than I've ever been, even though they've always been great. But I think our plan is to go forward again with that lens of we have that luxury.
Right. Stormy, as a drag performer in North Carolina, have you seen other community events that have been challenged or been banned or different things that have been shut down other than Drag Story Hour?
Yes, unfortunately, I am a show producer and I've had my own series events as well as my drag family members, as well as community members have events like high school proms or, excuse me, gay queer prom specifically, or community events. My drag sister put on a show in Moore County, North Carolina, that was targeted by the Proud Boys and led to them, or excuse me, the Proud Boys, and yeah, led to them attacking the resources of the town because of it. I have been kicked out of theaters for wanting to present all ages drag shows. And that is something that I've been doing since I started doing drag in 2014. And now I'm starting to see that because of, I think, libraries being bolstered or supported by community members and taking stronger stances, like Fritzy was saying, I'm starting to be welcomed back into my own local libraries. But for a time, um, I was performing in private spaces because I wasn't able to be within schools. People did not feel comfortable to reach out to me because of information being leaked to conservative journals or conservative watch groups, because information is public. And I think they make being close to me or close to drag queens in general dangerous. And that's how they divide us, is by making us something improper, making us something immoral. And it's a tactic, like as you said, that's been used since LGBTQ peoples have been fighting for rights. We are made to seem dirty, immoral, or wrong for children, and that is how they keep us out of spaces.
Yeah, we have like an internal joke, but not a joke, which is like the scariest thing about a drag story hour is a conservative with a gun, which is not funny, but also like kind of the reality of the situation is, yeah, drag is scary, but not for the reasons you think it is. And I think that hate is kind of working in that way. Um, so this question is geared towards Gary. Um, Limiting these events like Drag Story Hour, um, is this detrimental to kids understanding a diversity and self-expression? And what does that look like when the world changes with impact and like long-term ability to navigate the world that they live in? Like what's kind of like the big scope of like Gen Alpha with everything going on in the world with all these bannings and things going on?
Sure. Yeah, I think from a psychological perspective, limiting access to something like drag story hours really, like I said before, kind of affects the cognitive and emotional development piece, but also just having an understanding of diversity and self-expression. Self-expression is a big part of, um, you know, emerging youth, even before the emerging adulthood phase. But social learning theory is one of the big aspects that if we tie it back to psychology, that really creates a space for children to learn, not only in the way that they interact in their behaviors, but also social norms and how they see other people. So if they see other people that are different, that are being inclusive, that are being celebrated, it lets them see that difference is something that doesn't have to be scary, especially for younger children. And I think Drag Story Hour, for the most part, is something that provides kids with a model of diverse identities. If anything, for a lot of kids, they start to see difference as early as like 3 to 6 months, and then they start to really understand difference in race and other things like that when they're about the age of 5 to 6. Like they start to have a more complex understanding of that. And then 6 to 7 is where you really start to see the cognitive tools where they start to place people into categories, often based on what they've learned at home. So having these spaces available are really critical, I think, for long-term purposes and also in the short term. And when we limit that exposure, then they're less likely to develop a nuanced understanding of what identity is for them and what diversity is in the world that's around them. Um, and which I would argue, I would say is really essential in developing a well-rounded sense of self for a lot of kids. And I guess long term, any of these kind of limitations really can impair their ability to um, engage and thrive in a diverse and multicultural world. And I teach graduate students as well on top of the patients that I work with, and I teach diversity. And one of the things we really talk about is like understanding the power of difference. Like we are all human, but we also have differences, and not to see those differences is to mean that I don't exist. The struggles and the oppression that I've gone through don't exist. So by giving power and giving space and amplifying those voices and doing that at a very young age, we allow those kids to grow up and be more aware. And I think, in my work with kids, most of them are far better off than the adults I work with. And the children and the adolescents aren't the problem, it's the adults.
Amen to that. To my parents in the back. No, just kidding. As a queer person, I'm gay, if you didn't know this. And maybe I can speaking for myself, but maybe for Stormy and anyone else out there, that growing up with a heterosexual lifestyle did not make me heterosexual. And also being a queer person, you really have to kind of hide yourself, and that self-expression and finding yourself is often like secret and not really a safe space to kind of explore what could be. What is like not a what is like a near perfect model for kids to kind of grow up and really have a safe space for self-expression, to have it for them to self-express themselves safely enough for it to be like really healthy and not have, I guess, issues down the road with I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Um was like a good model for kids to grow up to really uh feel safe with expressing themselves, I guess I should say.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, one of the things I say to parents all the time, and that with the children that I work with, is the difference between a good day and potentially a suicidal day or a self-harming day or a risky or a risk-taking day is having a supportive family. And so when parents bring their kids to me, that's the first step that we kind of celebrate is like you're doing something, you're bringing your children in to have for services and to get support and help, but it's also helping your children to know. We know this because the CDC puts out a YRBS survey every year that kind of looks at the behaviors of middle school and high school kids all over the country. And the survey is in the tens of thousands of kids that are taking it. And year after year after year, the consistent thing that talks about protective factors among LGBTQ plus youth is having a supportive family or a supportive person, an adult, because oftentimes not all school districts are safe places for queer youth, and so they may not have a supportive adult even at school. So the GSAs are critical, for having a space for kids to have one teacher or one administrator and a group of kids that also identify as queer as well to have that safe space. And to have those kind of guardrails in place allows for a healthy adult development. The invalidation that kids get at a very early age leads to, lots of shame, lots of seeking ways to avoid that shame, which can be very dangerous. As adults, it turns into other things, but for teens as well, not getting validation at home and from people close to them leads them to seeking it out in other ways. So to have that healthy sense, I think it's really just have supportive people, allies especially, and not only parents but teachers.
Awesome. Thanks for navigating that question, working on my Barbara Walter skills. Um, but that's very insightful. Thank you. Um, I would say this is for Stormy, or I guess anyone on the panel, but Stormy, how do you respond to people who claim that well, drag story hour is inappropriate, drag is, adult entertainment, and do you have any personal experiences um about positive things that happen with story hour with audience members and families?
I mean, I think first and foremost, I always say as a drag performer, I'm an entertainer. I can make adults have a wonderful time at a nightclub, but I also can go into schools and libraries and use education. I have a background in children's education and environmental and ecological science. I love talking about science to kids and teaching kids that not only can we use science to learn about our world, but we can also make art with it. And that is knowledge I have as a human, as an individual. And when you think of communities, communities have elders or people who are older than the previous generation, and it is our job to share with the next generation. That's how communities thrive and grow. Communities are often based upon healthy children, healthy relationships with kids, teaching kids about the world around them. And so what people don't always realize until you have a queer child in your life is that children can be queer as well. And Story Hour has connected me to my community by allowing me to work with families and children. They are members of my community that I did not always see. And now when I get to see them, we get to share like stories or like interests, whether we're reading books about science and nature or whether we're talking about dragons and fantasy tales. One of my most favorite my mother would be so abhorred. My favorite memories of drag story hour was when I had a story hour at a library and mother and child were there, did not know that it was happening, but because it was right up front and there were balloons around, it was inviting. And as you said, it was a brave space, a space for that child. I think one of the things we don't talk about is how drag interrupts reality as we know it. We live in a very even in this America, we live in a very cold landscape. Color, fun, joviality. Forgive me on my conjugations, but we don't often get to have fun unless it's very sanctioned and centered in a certain way and around a certain POV. So Drag Story Hour gives people a chance to and place to express, as we said. And this child came in and they learned I was going to be at a museum doing science later on in the day. And, they really liked what I was wearing. And I said, well, you're more than welcome to get dressed up and come join me at the museum. And I just remember this child looked at their parent, and the parent said something like, oh, it's a busy day. Like, this is already a day. We didn't know these things were happening. And not only did they come to the museum, but they wore this dress for the first time, one that was in the closet that they had never felt comfortable to wear before, or they had never had an occasion to wear before. I think that is a big part of Story Hour. It gives children an occasion, I believe, because again, I'm an adult working with kids and I'm there to entertain them, and we're there to create this space for them to just enjoy and have fun. It just feels so interactive. And also, when we're having it in places like libraries and museums, it makes, I think, the libraries and museums seem less like a place an adult is bringing me and more like a place that is for me to do things in. And I think that all of that is why I really don't understand why people say Drag Story Hour is inappropriate. Again, if John Cena can be on Nickelodeon as well in a Marvel film, or Stevie Wonder can write songs about love, and also do Christmas tales. I can also be a full-on grown person and perform Meg the Stallion in one area, and I can read to children in another area. I'm a multifaceted person, just like parents are multifaceted. In fact, I've had story hours where it was simply centered around music or shared experiences between parents. And then I was introducing their kids to things their parents like fantasies and storytelling and magic. Parents are big old nerds, and I get to make their nerd realities come to life for their children. So then they don't have to convince their children to like Storm from the X-Men. I'm gonna be Storm from the X-Men, and then they're gonna fall in love with it, and then they go home and they watch the cartoon together. It's really just truly a whole space for building up everybody to just be happy and have fun.
Yes. Yes to all that. Wow, put a really damper on that after this next slide. But I guess juxtaposing uh the magic of Drag Story Hour and the joy we bring. Hate is really real. And these are two really great resources to kind of get a rounded view of what's happening in the US, not just against Story Hour, but against any marginalized group in the country. GLAAD's report, as well as Southern Poverty Law Center, have these really kind of amazing lists, but especially SPLC has a really kind of geolocated where you can really zoom in on your county or your town or district and really see what kind of like active hate groups are happening in your area. And it's again, with Fritzy saying it's all about safety, it's really about knowledge, and like you really got to know who's out there and who's against you to protect yourself in those certain ways that you need protecting with. As scary as that is. Yeah. Again, this question's for the whole panel, so anyone jump in, but are there parallels of banning books in the past and the current trend of banning books like Drag Story Hour? I guess this is actually more Fritzy based, but yeah.
I have thoughts.
Have we lived through this history? I mean, I know the answer to this question, but yeah, like
this is actually a great question. And I'm so glad that you threw in this idea about in the past, because things are constantly changing. But one thing that is consistent is that as long as there have been libraries and as long as there's been books, people have been trying to ban them. That's consistent through time. And most libraries have a procedure for that, how you can challenge a book. What's different now, and again, I mentioned it earlier, just in the last few years, it's not just like a parent or a community member coming in and saying, that book, I don't think it should be here. It's full on political, organized, and sadly effective banning. So Moms for Liberty, not to, harp on them, but why not? Moms for Liberty will come in and they'll just, figure out the system and request that, 50 books be banned, or they'll work with the state or city or town legislature to make sure that their point of view about what should be banned is made into law. That's something that has never happened before. And as I've said to at least 1 billion reporters, that's absolutely in parallel with the rise in anti-trans legislation. I mean, there's just no accident. This idea that you're banning books, and I won't go into a long story here, but just so everyone knows that, the books that are being banned right now are primarily for young people, for teenagers and young adults. And the books that are most often banned have themes that work around LGBTQIA plus characters or people of color. And it's not an accident. I think, Stormy, you mentioned this earlier, but when you ban a book or all the books about people of a certain group, essentially what you're saying is that group should be silenced, or worse yet, they should be erased. And imagine if you're like, Dr. Howell, I'm sure you know more about this than me, but like you're 14, you're 15, you're 16 years old, and you're just sort of figuring out who you are, and you think you might be gay, and all the books about gay characters are taken off the shelf. Like, what impression would that leave you with? I mean, it's pretty serious stuff. So the other part of the question, how do you handle those challenges? I think it's really important to sort of do what you're doing. And there are two things that I think Drag Story Hour is really great at. One is finding, as Mr. Rogers says, the helpers and your partners in the community, having other groups speak up for you, groups that, sorry, but like are a little more traditional, might appeal to a wider audience. And then doing the other thing that you're doing, which I just think is so important, it's getting yourself out into the media. You're really good at it, and you should keep at it. I know, like Jonathan, I saw you maybe a year or two ago doing a national interview on NBC, or maybe it was MSNBC. And something that I thought was really important, I was thinking a lot about that this weekend. You go on and you're sparkly and glittery, and you have a great outfit, and your makeup looks perfect. And in the beginning of the interview, that is all you see. But as the interview goes on, I realize that you're a human being, and that you're smart, and that you're funny, and that you have thoughts. And I was just noticing that exact same thing happened right here on this panel. When Stormy first came on, like, right, you're in beautiful purple sparkles, and you look beautiful, and you're glittery, and that's like all you see. But in just a little while, I learned that you love science, and you have a background in science, and you are so smart, and you're caring. And I stopped paying so much attention to the purple sparkles, not that you don't look fabulous. And I started paying attention to the human. And I think the more that you can show that you're just like everybody else, we're all like everybody else. We just have a different way of getting dressed and expressing ourselves. So keep on doing that, because I think it's really going to make a difference.
Gay rights. We all have our different drags that we do. Dr. Howell, like in the communities that you serve in Florida, how are families or you handling these challenges of maybe book banning or maybe resources that are available? I know the internet is there and you can always order something, but it really comes down to like, community and those touch points. Like how is that kind of working with you?
Yeah, so I do run a trans support group for youth and for their parents. And so something that they've done is, well, two of the publishers that had the most banned books sent me like boxes of books just to distribute. And a few weeks back we had the banned books week or whatever. So we actually distributed those books, and so a lot of the parents took them, and they have parent groups that they're part of, and they took them to those groups and other groups that they're part of, and so it just kind of spread. And they've done a lot of outreach to make sure that other kids are getting those books, and then they're passing the books around and sharing them, and they recycle them back through the office, and we send them out again. So things like that are ways that we're trying to make a little bit of a difference. And Florida passed the Don't Say Gay and some of the Stop Woke stuff, and a lot of that's been held up in court and is being litigated. So a lot of the bans have somewhat been lifted, but not everyone knows that. So it's still, because the teachers are not necessarily pushing the books out, and a lot of the kids that I work with saw when they went to the classroom and the teacher's bookshelf that usually had lots of rainbow colors on it was gone, and the sticker on the door was gone. A lot of the things that communicated that it was a safe place are gone. And even though some of the laws have been challenged, teachers are still afraid, because now there's an ability for people to sue teachers for the curriculums that they use, which never was the case before. But I think the grassroots kind of community efforts is where we begin to make those changes, of where the vast majority of people are okay with it. It's the politicians who are making this a mess. But when you look at the polls of people in the states, they don't have an issue with us teaching kids about this information. They don't have issues with us having drag story hours. It's the politicians.
I would add that's really true that most people in our country do not support book banning. It's just this very vocal, small minority, and they're the same people that are not all that much in favor of a drag story hour.
Yeah, that's interesting. And um, also, just Drag Story Hour itself is such a scapegoat for transphobia in the country, and we're just a reason to be pointed out for a larger thing that's happening. So that's always been the case. It's just now it's been even more challenging and difficult than it was Fritzy in 2000 whatever 2015, 16.
I was just going to add, I think it is important, based on what you were saying, to recognize that there are always going to be that small group of people who are just, you may never reach. I saw this interview on NBC a couple of days ago where the reporter was interviewing voters in Michigan who were of Lebanese descent, like they were Lebanese Americans, or they had relatives in Lebanon, or they had some connection there. And she asked them, how many of you are going to vote for Kamala Harris? And no one raised their hand. And then she, did a few more questions, and she said, is there anything that would change your mind at all to vote for Kamala Harris? And they all said, there's nothing that you can do, nothing at all to change our mind. And there is going to be that small part of any population who's going to be like that. But I think we have great hope for the rest with a little more education that things will get better.
Positivity for the future, open-mindedness. Um, yeah, this next question, it's probably geared to Dr. Howell, but another critique of Drag Story Hour is that this is confusing and harmful to kids in their development, going to a drag story hour, seeing a drag performer. What is that true? And what does that look like? What happens when a kid sees um a drag performer with their development?
Well, and I think it depends on, age, but obviously, like when we're talking about younger kids, the cognitive development is a big part of what we're concerned about as parents and as educators and as clinicians, is like to make sure that the spaces that children are learning in are inclusive. Naturally, there's going to be some what we call disequilibrium, like not really understanding at first what they're seeing, and that's normal. That's typical when it's the first time a child is encountering someone that's very bright and glittery and pretty and all those things. Like it can be at first, like and I think Stormy can probably attest to this. Like seeing children see a drag queen for the first time, their eyes light up really big. And I don't know, I haven't seen too many kids cry with a drag queen, but I've seen a lot of kids cry with Santa Claus. Um, but the that initial encounter can be different, but that confusion leads to them from a psychological perspective to assimilate or accommodate new information, to bring it in, which is really responsible for brain growth and for cognitive growth and cognitive maturing. And I think the naysayers, on the other side of that, I don't think it's confusing kids as much as it is like allowing them to have an experience of something diverse and different, which then leads to more inclusive environments all around.
Amazing. And again, I feel like I'm just making a general assumption that everyone on obviously on the panel and who's attending is that um, there is a difference between sex and gender. And I think the main thing is people aren't educating themselves enough with those, how they relate to each other, how they're separate, what drag is, what drag isn't. And I think that's part of the bigger thing is just being all that mis and disinformation people have been getting over the years and how, like Fritzy was saying earlier, like basically the queer community has been damned kind of since the dawn of time. And book bannings have been happening since libraries have been open. Same with queer people. It's just like associated with, being degenerates or witches or devil worship, whatever it may be. It's always been the case. This is just that 2024 version of that, and we have Wi-Fi and iPhones. That's the only difference, I guess. We're almost at time, so I'm going to stop these questions here, and I'm going to answer some or ask some questions to the panel from our attendees. One question we have a lot of questions about how to protect libraries, but this question asks, what can students, teachers, or just me as an individual do to support libraries and continue their legacy?
Well, thanks so much for the question and for being so nice to libraries. I think the most important thing right now is all the things that you've always heard about, talk to your neighbors, attend the library, get your library card. And the library will never tell you how to vote, but you should vote. We talked earlier that a lot of the things that are happening now are being legislated. So I think if you want to support your library and you can't make a big, gigantic donation, you can still do your part by being a part of the community and by voting.
Amazing. Go vote. This next question I feel like could be a twofer for Dr. Howell and Stormy, but as a parent, how can I continue the conversations started by Drag Story Hour about acceptance and identity at home? Either can be about censorship or acceptance and self-expression.
Hey, don't be shy. I was gonna say that I think one, allowing your child to lead any conversation at home feels positive because that's when you start to develop a relationship where a child can come to you with conversations, especially as Dr. Gary said, when they're bewildered. I like to use allegories. I think when children are confused about something, I didn't say it first, but people say that being curious is a way of being kind. And so taking wonder, and so when you're met with something that is confusing, and think of me like a math problem. Like, you don't want your child to back down from a challenge, and you want your child to figure out equations. Have a conversation about me. Use me as a conversation starter. I'm sure there's an aunt or an uncle, it's somewhere on the family tree, that I can help you have a conversation about all the things that are drag.
And I think it normalizes like being able to take that experience from seeing a live story and then going home and having a process, like the things we talk about, whether it's at the dinner table or on the sofa or in the car on the way home, is really about reinforcing the beauty of what you've just experienced, and creating space where we're not othering people in that way, because I think that's the difference between having a healthy child and a child that grows up with very toxic beliefs, and all those beliefs that come 5, 6, 7 years old, where we're starting to see the difference and understand that and place people into categories and stereotype, comes from the adult side of things. So that's what they're learning and what they're hearing in that car ride home. So if the parents are being supportive and embracing what's being discussed. I mean, at the end of the day, you're listening to a story, but it's also the story told by an amazing person. So it's like being able to share that with your kids is powerful.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. I mean, we could have made this an 8-hour panel. I had so many other more questions planned out, but I think we're at time. Um, we may bring Dan back to wrap us up. But thank you so much, Dr. Howell, Fritzy, and Stormy for being here today. Please follow up with us. You can follow our social media channels. If you're into that, visit our website, reach out to us via email if you have more questions or want to chat more or want to have a story hour come to you, either virtually or physically. We travel. So yeah, come experience the magic of storytelling. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and everyone here. I just want to take a moment to thank Drag Story Hour for organizing this amazing panel, and to our panelists, Jonathan, Stormy, Fritzy, and Gary, for taking time out of their busy schedules. And again, a big thank you to our sponsors, and we hope to see you much more this week. Please check out the rest of our schedule at medialiteracyweek.com and have a happy Media Literacy Week. Thank you.